Greetings and welcome to Distillate. In the previous few videos, we have familiarized ourselves with for and while loop. These come under sequentials and they are very important when we start to repeat a set of statements in our code. So if you have not watched these, please go back and watch these videos before you start with this. Okay, now we are today changing the IDE from the original that we used to Spyder. So this can be downloaded from their website. The links for downloading this I have provided in the description. So please do download this and start with me, right? Spyder is a very comfortable IDE compared to what we used before, the original one. This is very, very comfortable. So let's try to get familiar with the interface. Uh, this part on the left-hand side is the editor, something similar to what we have used before. This is where we write our entire code, our entire Python script. The bottom right corner over here, this is the Python shell. So this is where we executed operations. For example, 1 plus 2. We could just type it out over here and it would give us an output 3, right? And over here, on the top right corner, if you see, this is a very interesting window, which is the variable explorer. So this is what makes Spyder very convenient to use because this sort of gives us the names of the variables that we have defined and what is the value of those variables. But that actually makes it very convenient. You'll see as we use Spyder more often, right? And there are also plots. There's a window for plots. So in the next few lectures, we'll be dealing with plotting things here and there. So here, plots is very, very important. And this is something that I found very hard to implement in the original ideally that we had been using so far. That is why a switch to Spyder was necessary. So in most of my research and whatever Python I have worked on, Spyder is the IDE that I have used most often. So this is something that I want you all to be comfortable with as well. And you could use other IDLEs as well as per your convenience. But this is what I feel most convenient with. And this is what I'll be using. Okay, so make sure that you install Spyder before you go ahead and watch this video. Okay, so in today's video, we'll be talking about a very interesting thing in Python, which is known as list. So list is something that is very, very useful. And in most of my work that I have done so far with Python, uh, lists is something that I have used most commonly. There are other data types such as, so list, by the way, is one of the 4 inbuilt data types that Python offers. Apart from list, there is tuples, sets, and dictionaries. But list is something that I've used most often. So this is very useful. And in other programming languages, this is known as an array. Okay, so what is a list? List is any variable that can store multiple values. All right, a single variable that could store multiple values. So for example, if I define a variable, let's say a equals to 2, this is a variable a that stores just 2 values. And as you see, as I mentioned, that this variable explorer window gives you a equals to 2, like the names of the variables, their data types, as well as their values, right? But let's say I want this variable a to store multiple values, let's say 1, 2, and 3. So in that case, I want this a to be an array, which in Python we call as list. So how do we define a list? So we write a equals to 1, 2, 3, both enclosed in a parentheses, closed brackets, and separated, all the values should be separated by commas. So if you write this, you will get a as a list of size 3, and this is the list, right? So this becomes very, very useful. So for example, I want to create a list. So to create a list, I could just start with the name of the list, the name of the variable, that is L, equals to 1, 2, 3. So this is a list, and I have assigned this list to the variable L. Okay. You could also create what we call as an empty list. So an empty list is a list of zero size. So it is just this, an empty list. So if we execute this, by the way, to execute this, we use the play button over here. So this is what we have. We have created an empty list L. Now, as you see, in this code, we have not written A anywhere, but still we have got some A from somewhere, right? This A has come up here because we have used A over here. So this does not sort of get refreshed, right? And these variables that we have defined earlier, we actually need to delete them at times. Especially when you'll be writing more complex codes, you would want to delete these variables. So to do that, you could click on this icon, and when you do that, you could just delete it. So now this space would get cleared, right? And now when you execute this, you'll just get an empty list. Now I've named both my lists as L, so I'll rather name the other one as L1. So now you have two lists. One is L, which I have created here, and I have L1, which is an empty list that I have created, right? So the empty list would have a size 0, right? Now there is a very interesting command that you could use, and that is dot append. So first of all, you need to define a list. So you could either define a list like this, or you could just make an empty list. All right. So let's start with an empty list. Let's say L2 equals to an empty list, right? And then I could write L2, the name of the variable, dot append, and whatever I want to append. Let's say 5. So when I do this, I get a list L2 with one uh, value in it, that is this 5, right? So this is a list of size 1, right? So to get the size of the list, we use len. Okay. So uh, if we just write print len L2, so that would actually give us 1 as the output. So here you see 1 is the output, right? So len is again used for calculating the length of this list. Okay. All right. Now we could create a list with multiple numbers. So let's say I'll just remove all of this from here. And let's say I want to create a list of numbers 1 to 5. Okay, so I want 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in my list, right? So first of all, let's delete all the variables. Now, as I mentioned, we'll start with the creation of an empty list. L1 equals to an empty list. Okay. Next, now we need to append 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So we could do this L1 dot append 1, L1 dot append 2, L1 dot append 3, and so on, right? And by looking at this, you might be able to remember one of the previous videos wherein we discussed that if a statement is repeated multiple times, we could go ahead and use loops, right? So over here, rather than writing the statement 5 times, we would say for I in range starting from 1, ending at 5. So we give the stopping value as 6 because we do not want the last value to be 6. We want the last value to be 5. So for I in range 1, comma 6, L1 dot append I gives us this value, right? So this writing this statement 5 times or writing this is both are equivalent, right? So we'll do that and we'll run this. And when we do that, we get the list L1 with all the all the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. All right. Next thing that we could do now is, let's say, to create a list of odd numbers, say from 1 to 5, right? So now we want the odd numbers 1, 3, and 5. Okay. So we'll again create an empty list L2. And now we want to append 1 here. We want to append 3 here. And we want to append 5 here. Now we see that we are appending it thrice. So we want some code to run thrice, some loop to run thrice, right? So we'll start with for I in range 3. This runs thrice. L2 dot append. Now we want that when I is equal to 0, it should append 1. When I is equal to 1, it should append 3. When I is equal to 2, it should append 5. Now, this could be a little challenging. So the best way to do that is we define some variable, say a, and we could keep its value as 1. And inside the loop, we could just append a. And once this has been appended, we increment the value of a by 2. So this just makes that when I equals to 0, a is equal to 1. When I would be 1, a would be 1 plus 2, which is 3. And when I would be 2, a would be 3 plus 2, which is 5. So it is equivalent to this, right? So when we do that, we can easily create a list L2 with 1, 3, and 5, right? Another way to do the same thing is by using a counter. So this is again sort of a recap to the loop videos that I have uploaded in the past, but that's fine. So we could start with some count equals to 0. And when we are introducing a counter, of course, we'll use while loop. Now, since we need 3 values to be appended here, we would ensure that count should be less than 3 because count can have values 0, 1, and 2, right? If you start with count equals to 1, then we could include 3 as well because that could have values 1, 2, and 3, right? So then it would be less than equal to. But let's start with count equals to 0. So count would be less than 3, right? And of course, we'll define some variable a equals to 1 and we'll make an empty list L3 equals to an empty list and we'll append this a inside the loop, increment this a by 2 and increment our counter by 1. This is something that we have discussed before, right? So this would again create the list L3 with 1, 3, and 5, right? And finally, there is another way that I could do it with, and that is using if statement. All right. So instead of introducing a counter here, what I could do is I could start with an empty list L4 And while the length of this list is less than 3, the increment should keep on happening. As soon as the length becomes 3, it should come out of the loop. So this becomes the stopping criteria, that while len L4 is less than 3, so this actually ensures that the value of the length of L4 is less than or equal to 3, because as soon as it becomes equal to 3, it would exit the loop, right? Okay. Now we definitely need to append something to our L4. Now what should we append? We should append some A. But if we do not want to increment it by 2, we could use an if statement. So we could start with some A equals to 0 and say that if A is not divisible by 2, which means A modulo 2, which is remainder when A is divided by 2, is not equal to 0. This implies that it is not divisible by 2, right? Then this should happen. You should append it by A. Otherwise, don't do anything, right? And in each, while as long as the loop is running, we append the value of A by 1. So what this does is it takes A equals to 0, goes inside, first sees that length is 0. So this condition is satisfied, goes here. A is divisible by 2. So this value is equal to 0, does not append anything, and increments the value of A to 1, right? After that, it goes and checks. Length is still 0. It goes and checks here. This A modulo 2 is now not 0, which means this condition is satisfied. And then it goes and appends the value of A, that is 1, to the list. Comes out, says A plus equal to 1, means A equals to 2 now. Then again checks, length is now 1. So still this is satisfied. Checks, A is equal to 2, therefore this is not satisfied, increments it to 3, and so on. So this would do the same thing, and it would create a list 1, 3, and 5. So these are the ways in which you could create a list for anything that you want to do, right? Okay. So lists is something that is really important, and I really want all of you to be very, very comfortable with using lists. So I have decided to include a self-assessment uh, after almost every video that I upload for lists, right? So for this video, you will find a self-assessment test. Please do attempt that so that you are very comfortable with lists before you move on to the next video, right? If you have issues with uh, the self-assessment, you're not able to do something, maybe watch the video again. You could also mention if you're having doubts in the comments section. Also, I would also provide self-assessments for all the videos subsequently now, so you could do that. You could also mail your doubts to me in the email that I have provided in the description, right? And please make sure that you're comfortable with whatever is being done in this channel, whatever is being taught here, because my objective is really to help you out in learning all of these skills. So please do not hesitate to ask any questions. And yeah, I also want you all to be very comfortable with loops. So I would recommend trying to practice how to calculate the factorial using loops. So try developing a code for yourself. I will upload a few tutorials in a few days, maybe, where I will uh, help you out in getting the factorial using for loop or while loop. But yeah, I would highly recommend that you try that on yourself by yourself so that you would be comfortable with loops, right? And just try to make sure that whatever we're doing here, you're okay with it, and then move on to the next video. Don't rush. Make sure that you get all of this clearly.